The proceeding will start shortly.
Order, and welcome to the Energy Security and Net Zero Committee on our session on heating our homes. So this first panel is with Ofgem and the next panel is with the Minister, Lord Callanan. We have a panel of 3 from Ofgem. It's good to see you here, ladies and gentlemen. I'll ask you to introduce yourselves, job titles and what have you. Name, rank and serial number, basically, starting from my left.
My name is Nell Kenward. I'm the Director for Strategy, Economics Research and the Net Zero Transition in Ofgem.
Indeed, I recently saw you in Glasgow at the Ofgem meeting on Albion Street. Yes.
Hello, I'm Neil Lawrence. I'm the Director of Delivery and Schemes at Ofgem.
Good to see you too.
Hi, I'm Laura Nell. I'm the Deputy Director for Policy and Schemes Development in Ofgem.
Excellent, thank you. Thank you all for coming this afternoon. Just to kick off, can you update us on when Ofgem's heat networks regulation will come into effect and how it's protecting consumers in the meantime?
Start with that one.
Okay, thank you.
We're working really closely with government at the moment on developing the regulatory framework for heat networks. We put out a joint consultation last year and we're sort of working through the results of that. That there is a lot to do. I think people will recognise the sort of minimum level of protection that currently exists for heat network customers. And we completely recognise the urgency of needing to get these protections in place as soon as possible. My understanding is that government is planning to transition in protections from April 2025, and this will include things like access to an ombudsman for complaint handling, some minimum standards of compensation related to the reliability of the service, and other, in time, more protections are related to proportional pricing, but we're expecting that will take longer to bring in.
Okay, I mean, there's been some evidence that consumers saw their energy bills almost double in January due to the sudden rises in Economy 7 night rates. What's Ofgem's take on that?
So, the Economy 7 tariffs, as you'll appreciate, they offer a lower, they incentivise people to use their energy off-peak. And reward customers with lower bills as a result. Those tariffs do have to operate within the price cap formula. So what we require suppliers to do is make sure that the weighted average of the 2 components of the Economy 7 or other tariffs like that must be within the price cap level. So we ensure that value is delivered to consumers. But I would say that balance can be achieved in different ways, and different suppliers choose different balances. So
You say they have to work within the formula. Who sets the formula?
So we set the price cap level overall. We give a weighting between the 2 time periods, which reflects normal consumption rates, and we then require them to essentially be within that average in setting their Economy 7 tariffs.
Because with the weighting you gave.
So they will be. Consumers should be able to benefit in any scenario if they have time patterns of consumption that are benefiting from those sort of time of use tariffs. What I'd say is that different suppliers have different balances of prices between them, and we would strongly encourage consumers to shop around to get the best possible deal.
Okay. The written evidence says that evidence of poor installer behaviour and consumer experience remains across technologies, including when issues arise after installation. And what would you want to see happening to address this and to change that experience?
This is one.
Yeah, I can come in on that one. So we recognise the importance of customers having confidence in products for green heating and insulation, and actually it's really important that customers are treated fairly and that there are protections against harmful practices. Currently, Ofgem, on the schemes that it administers for fuel poverty and energy efficiency, works really closely with the standards bodies, MCS and Trustmark, who I know you've heard from previously. Those codes offer some protection in terms of the quality of the installation, and they offer some protection around complaint handling as well. But this is an area that the CMA have looked at closely and have sort of concluded that there is room for improvement amongst the sort of standards offered by the standards bodies. Our view is that it's really important that the standards bodies are able to use their sanction powers really impartially and rigorously, and it's really important that the businesses joining the schemes are vetted thoroughly when they join, because I think it's really difficult at the moment for customers to understand what sort of how much weight they can place on the value of any given certification scheme, given the proliferation of them in the sector.
If you want to come in then, Mark Donegan.
Well, no, so just as I have a pet hate against dodgy builders, and it's one of these things where I've tried on a couple of occasions to try to get the government to introduce a licensing scheme, a compulsory licensing scheme. So you can look at things like Trustmark, which are fantastic, but they're voluntary. And it continues to, we continue to see problems across the whole of this small residential sector where you have dodgy builders and it's not being resolved. So I'll just get my whinge in at that.
I presume you're not alone in this despising of dodgy builders. I don't think there'd be many who'd love them.
Well, there are a lot of very good builders.
Yeah, they go, exactly.
So we mustn't malign the whole of the sector, but amongst all of these, they're amazingly, you'll be surprised to hear one or two dodgy MPs. But it's
certainly not on this panel, and I say, look, I'm turning on Lloyd Russell Moyle to show there's not.
I'll come back on to how we stop fraud in a second, but you have 11 schemes that you administer. The boiler upgrade scheme, the domestic renewable heat incentive, the energy company obligation, the feed-in tariffs, the Great Britain installation scheme, the green gas support scheme, the green gas levy renewables obligation, the warm home discount. I've already forgotten what I started with on that list. And many of those schemes have got huge underspends, no? You know, the boiler upgrade scheme failed to spend 2/3 of its annual budget in the first year. Eco fell by 59% in 2022. Is it not clear that the consumers have not a clue of all these different schemes? You have totally bamboozled them, and you're not really helping at all with any of them, and they should be scrapped and replaced with one clear scheme that people actually understand, rather than the myriad of mess that you have presided over.
So let me start off with that one. So our role is the administrator of the schemes. So our role is to work with government. They've decided the policy, and as administrator, we make sure that we develop operations that are easy for customers with regard to that schemes. They have access to them. So as scheme participants, we have to do a lot of work around
you
fraud
administer
and
the
compliance.
The scheme. How easy is it for a customer to come along and say, I have a house, I've got no idea what scheme I'm available to, I just want a reputable builder to come along and to be able to do the work and to me have peace of mind? Is that possible in any of the schemes that you've designed?
So, with regard to the individual schemes, there's help available from Ofgem. I think we all recognise that it could be confusing. We administer the schemes you mentioned, but in addition to that, there are other scheme administrators for other areas of government as well. So it's not just about Ofgem.
Okay, but out of the schemes that you administer, could someone come along and say, I have this house, can you just provide me a reputable person that I know will not defraud me, that will just do the work rather than me being an expert? Do you offer that?
No.
Why not?
Well, I think on the boiler upgrade scheme, for example, it's an installer-led scheme. It's largely demand-led, and MCS as a standards body do keep a list of registered installers.
It's demand-led, but the demand is from the customers, and they haven't got a dicky bird clue about any of this stuff, and you're not helping them.
Well, we publish guidance on the administration of our schemes and...
guidance to who?
For property owners and for installers on the
where
boiler
are those
upgrade scheme.
So if I'm a property owner, where can I type in my details and get given a person that I can speak to that will help me guide through that process? Is that possible?
The government have been doing work on putting a number of schemes behind the digital front door, and those schemes go beyond the schemes.
What have you been doing? You administer your schemes. You acknowledge that your schemes are impenetrable for the consumer, apart from guidance that you provide. How can they speak to someone and be connected directly with someone that will actually help them?
Sorry, I just want to be clear. We don't just publish guidance. We have an operations centre. We speak to customers. We help them guide them through this.
There is an ability for
to
speak directly to someone.
You can speak directly to somebody at Ofgem, and you can ask people about eligibility of the scheme. You can get help and advice with regard to the individual scheme. The matters that we're just talking about, though, I think there is more work to be done if you're a consumer looking at the plethora of things that you could do to get on the energy efficiency journey to improve your home. And that is something that we're working with government on around this front door.
So why did eco fall by 59% in 2022? And why did the boiler upgrade scheme just only have a third of its budget spent?
Yeah. So let's start with the boiler upgrade scheme and talk generally around it. When a new scheme is introduced, it is very common to see what we call an S-curve. And that is a slow start to the scheme. As the scheme becomes, people become more knowledgeable about the scheme, understand that it's there, and then you see an increased uptake through the scheme lifetime, and then at the end of the scheme, obviously working at a faster rate. So appreciate where we are with the boiler upgrade scheme at present in terms of where it is in terms of the numbers. We're working with government, with the suppliers, with consumer groups to kind of understand how we can offer and speed up any of those processes in the role, our role as administration. But the policy is for government.
To upgrade my boiler, I have my usual plumber that does my work. I ring him up and I say, I want you to install the boiler. Is that possible?
To install, under the boiler upgrade scheme, the grants are for air source and ground source heat pumps and biomass boilers.
Yeah, sorry. I want you to upgrade. Sorry, I want you to upgrade my heating. Is that possible? My usual boiler, the person I trust, because I don't know about these other people, my usual boiler that's just my usual plumber who lives down the road from me.
If they're registered with MCS and
What's
certified,
the percentage that are registered?
We've got over 1,000 installers that are registered on the bus scheme.
What's that as a percentage of plumbers across the country?
I couldn't tell you.
It's a tiny fraction of plumbers across the country, isn't it? So the likelihood is that I would not be able to use my trusted boiler, my trusted plumber. Sorry, I was calling my boiler. Boiler in my mind. My trusted plumber. And you're forcing me to use someone that I haven't got a dick bird's clue who they are. I don't know who they are from Adam, apart from that they might have advertised on the internet, and I have no trust. So the second part of my question is, what measures are you doing to stop fraud happening? Because you are asking consumers to engage with people that they don't know.
So let me start off with the fraud piece. So fraud is something we take really, really seriously. If you take those schemes that we manage, we're managing circa £9.6 billion worth of government money every year. So it's something we take really, really, really seriously. For each of the schemes that we perform, we have defined a fraud risk assessment to understand where the risks are with each of those schemes, where they could be penetrated. I think it's absolutely right that we spend time thinking about fraud. It's a big risk for government. We're on that journey. We speak to the Public Sector Fraud Authority regularly. In fact, we've got Mark Cheeseman attending one of our all-staff calls in delivering schemes in the next month or so to discuss the topic. It's one of my strategic priorities this year. We invest a lot of money in both the detection and the prevention of fraud, and will continue to do so. With fraud, there's always a risk. There absolutely is. So you can't you can't insure against all of it. We would create schemes that are impenetrable, and we'd spend a disproportionate amount of money. So there will always be a risk with regard to it. But we are doing everything we can, recognising that it is a growing problem and something that we're really, really focused on.
So when that's useful, and thank you very much that you recognise that. Do you think there is a problem that a relationship with people that a consumer might not know increases that risk, not decreases it, of fraud?
I think there are a number of different fraud risks in each of the schemes, the fraudsters are very, very clever. They are working on this when government money is available. We've seen it through other government initiatives. We have to be on top of it. I don't want to get into specific examples in a public forum for obvious reasons, but there is a significant risk around fraud.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mark Callanan.
Thank you, Laura. Perhaps if I could turn to you. I wanted to ask some questions about sort of innovation in pricing models and how that can bump into regulations or find itself sort of being unregulated. One of the things we've been hearing from is a number of people who are coming up with sort of things, for example, as heat as a service type of models coming out. There's things sort of slightly more complicated. We heard from fuel poverty action, that actually part of the problem with this is that what you're seeing is innovation coming into this area that is specifically being targeted at the richer. And actually you would kind of imagine that would be the case because you've got a bigger market to go to. And that we're seeing sort of fuel poverty is not being addressed through innovation. What I'm sort of interested to hear from you is how do you aim to encourage innovation in energy tariffs and business models whilst making sure that the right people are being targeted and also that the regulations are adapting quick enough for these new business models? I'm just wondering, you may not be the right person.
Should we Neil first?
I'll start. Laura may add to my
answer.
Indeed. So we are, first off, it's important to say we are really delighted to see the level of innovation coming into the market at the moment. There's a surge of innovation. But I think you're right to observe that a lot of that is focused at, for example, owners of electric vehicles, where there's huge opportunities to benefit the system and indeed the EV owner with new types of tariff. So we support innovation in a number of ways. We run a regulatory sandbox that enables companies to test ideas before they're put out to the whole market. We have an innovation link service, so it's a sort of advisory service that new innovators can contact to find out exactly how rules apply to different things. And we oversee a major pot of innovation money, which we can target onto some of the most important challenges the sector faces. But your point is a valid one, that a lot of that tariff innovation at the moment is at the, if you like, the higher end, better off end of the market. So we do encourage the industry to promote and develop more innovative solutions that are going to be beneficial to the whole consumer base and indeed in particular the vulnerable. And we are seeing benefits of technology there. So for example, smart prepayment meters are dramatically better and more user-friendly for consumers than the traditional ones. And we see there is opportunity to do a lot more in that space, which we are encouraging the sector to do.
I mean, on that tech point, a lot of this innovation is coming through with technology, smartphones, all the rest of it. Not everybody is tech savvy. Looking around this table here, I'm just wondering, that would be too rude about my colleagues, but I certainly struggle a little bit with tech as it gets more things. Do we again? How do you make sure that innovation isn't entirely reliant on everybody having a smartphone and a sort of fairly good working knowledge of technology?
I think that's a fair challenge, but actually the sort of coming generation of technologies, they are smart enough that they can sort of work for people. They do the hard work, they do the complicated bit, and you might, for example, just put a particular setting on a device when you get it, and then it operates smartly and does the work for you. So I think technology offers opportunities across the whole spectrum.
I would also add that there's a lot of work that we do with suppliers under the Warm Home discount that enables them to test more innovative approaches to getting support to fuel-poor customers. And one of those innovations has been making sure customers in park homes get the rebate. So it enables different approaches to support to be trialled.
Do you, for these innovators coming up with these ideas, do you set down minimum standards that you require from them in terms of what they're providing? Or is it a bit of a free-for-all?
So the sector is an unregulated sector in a sense, but obviously we have a broad role to try and protect consumers. We're bringing the industry together. I see the benefits of technology and the benefits for all in technology. Clearly, there has to be a journey, and some of the prosumer stuff that goes on first of all, kind of gets that kick-started before others can catch up. So, with our role in the industry, bring people together, the innovation funds that Neil have mentioned, we're trying to kick-start that and accelerate it so that the benefits can be reached by all.
But specifically on the standards, I mean, sort of people can come up with a solution which can tie people in sort of terrible knots, or get them committed to. I mean, we've seen at the most basic level some long-term contracts which tie people into long-term contracts. It doesn't necessarily benefit them over a sort of say 2 or 3 year cycle or whatever. Do you when you're looking at these new things, can you set a standard? Or certain levels of delivery, or is that just too complicated to do, or even not in your remit?
If you look broadly at that market area, there is, I think, improvements in consumer standards that are needed, and that's not solely our job. The CMA recently reported on a broad range of further standards that are needed to protect consumers that are in this journey. We're able to help, we're able to contribute towards that conversation, but it's not solely our role.
Okay.
And if you're talking about the specific sort of oversight of tariffs, there are obviously obligations on all suppliers to be fair and treat consumers well. And we constantly monitor that market. And if we were getting signs of abuse, then we intervene at speed. And we recognise the market is getting more complicated, and we're going to have to move and upgrade our own capabilities as that happens.
And one of the problems with any sort of financial sort of instrument, which ultimately these models are, is they're always pushing the boundaries, they're always pushing the edge of the envelope, and it's not always that easy to know what's going on. And witness the 2008 financial crash, where very clever people were coming up with very clever systems, which actually were fundamentally deeply flawed, but nobody picked up that where it was going wrong, and nobody really predicted there's going to be a problem. Yet in retrospect, you sort of say this was blindingly obvious it was going to go wrong.
And you're right to flag the issue, and it's something we already look at, but I agree that over time we may need to do more.
Yeah, okay. All right, thank you. Angus.
Yeah, thank you. We've heard some evidence over the piece about the role of regional energy strategic planners in relation to heat transition. And just starting off, maybe I should get thanks, Neil Kenward.
Bouncing around a bit.
I mean, what are your expectations of that? I mean, I'll come back to what some of the evidence was saying to us during the thing, but I'd like to hear from you first.
Of course. So often in pioneering the development of the regional energy system planners, the RESPs, we think they will be a really important component of helping to plan and ensure that the net zero transition, partly in heat, but actually across other vectors of the energy transition, is done in a coordinated and hopefully therefore smoother, lower cost fashion. And it recognises that there will be some national policies, but actually it will matter how those are delivered locally, and there will be some differentiation in different areas.
I'm detecting a bit of a departure of philosophy in the energy space, at least in the UK. I mean, with the session this morning, we had people looking for sort of an idea of a system brain, not just leaving things to market forces. What you're saying here is just signals and certain stimuli isn't what we're looking for. We're actually looking for people to take charge, take ownership, plan and make sure that and work on a project to make sure it's delivered almost.
And I think that's right, and you're right to notice that there has been a shift, and we welcome and have indeed been pushing for that shift. We don't think it is turning the backs on the role of the market, which is still hugely important to deliver competition and best value, but actually the scale, pace and complexity of the net zero challenge, of that transition, does require more coordination and more planning, both at the national level, which is one reason that the NESO, the National Energy System Operator, has been set up and will have a strategic planning function. But also, we believe that at the regional and local levels, that there needs to be a counterpart to the national planning.
Back into this philosophy, what you're saying is the market will work okay when the structure is set up, but when you're moving from one model to the other, you basically have to have a compass, and you have to have somebody steering that.
I think that's right, and that's why there's been, if you like, this move back towards more central planning to deliver that change.
In the third session of the inquiry, the Metro Mayor for the West of England, Dan Norris, who used to be an MP, also told us that mayors and regional authorities could play a greater role in joining the links between the local area energy plans to share best practice and encourage economies of scale. I highlighted that local expertise in regional authorities and their ability to disseminate knowledge in the region would be useful as well, and it would be helpful to see how these regional energy strategic planners could work alongside existing stakeholders and functions. And do you envisage that, as Mr Norris did?
That's absolutely the intent. And in fact, our Chief Executive, Jonathan Brearley, he's convened a meeting of Metro Mayors to discuss exactly these sort of issues. I think the regional energy system
must have been paying attention to Dan Norris's plea when he was at the...
So, and I think these plans will only work if they have got local buy-in, and I think they will be an important vehicle for bringing those local stakeholders together. and starting to shape the sort of solutions that work best in each locality and region.
Barry Gardner, you want to come in at this stage, I think.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I just want to get an understanding from you how these regional strategy planners are going to relate to the NESPO, to the national. Because NESPO is going to be up and running by the summer.
Yes.
It's going to take some time for it to produce its strategic plan.
Yeah.
These guys are presumably going to be working on their local strategic plan, and then somebody's got to begin seamlessly stitching the two together, which is going to add considerable time to this process. What is your estimate as Ofgem of what that timescale is, how it then produces a bottleneck in the system to getting the delivery that we need?
So you're absolutely right. Knitting this together is going to be a vital part of it. What we envisage is that these regional system planners will actually sit as part of the national energy system operator. So that ensures they're plugged into the national plan. They'll obviously have to work very closely with the regional authorities, local authorities, to develop the local components of the plan. And that hopefully helps ensure a degree of join-up between these plans.
This gets me so worried because...
You might be the Energy Minister in the future Labour government doing this.
In my dreams, it was, Chair. Yesterday, we heard at the Environmental Audit Select Committee from Ofgem, and I was expressing then concerns about governance and buy-in. I don't know whether you had seen what that. But Ofgem and the NESPO, we're told, are going to be working hand in glove very closely together in agreeing everything as it goes along, so there's full transparency, there's no surprises at the end of the day. You're now telling me that the rest are going to be, the regional people are going to be stitched into that as they go and working very closely. There isn't, so everybody's bought into the process. You're bought into it as Ofgem. The regional people are bought into it. Where is the independent governance here, and how does anybody hold anybody else to account if and when things go wrong? Because you've all agreed the thing every step of the way.
So what we're trying to do is ensure there is consensus behind the proposals. The actual specific plans will be done in a very consultative, open and transparent way that will enable stakeholders across the board to contribute their views, and working hand in glove, I would suggest, with local and regional authorities.
So your answer to my question, if I can translate it, is things can't go wrong. And I'm afraid that's not history.
And the reality will be, I think, there'll be learning experiences. In fact, a number of local areas have already done local area energy planning.
My question is, who holds whom to account if and when things do go wrong? You see, you at the moment, as Ofgem, have a governance function, right? That's your job, to hold people to account and tell them, no, I'm sorry, you're not doing that right. In this new system, there ain't none.
So we are the regulator for, including in its new state, the National Energy System Operator will continue to play that regulatory function. Obviously, we are working with them to create...
You can't criticise them, because they'll turn round to you. If things go wrong, they'll turn round to you and say, don't blame us. You had sight of this every step of the way and you agreed each step. So you can't come now back on us. That's what they're going to say to you, and you know it.
I think we can certainly hold them to account for delivering on those plans and for making sure that those plans are developed in a sensible and effective way, in line with the sort of the approach that we've been developing and discussing with a wide range of stakeholders. So I should say this is at a relatively early stage, so the details are still to be nailed down. And
we've got very limited time.
Your questions may indeed change these details, Mr. Gardner. So
This is something I think we should return to you on, actually, as this issue develops, to give you that assurance, because I agree there are risks in developing new structures. So we would be very happy to return as the process develops.
I think that would be really helpful, and maybe with some suggestions about how that governance can be built into the system, constructed. Yeah. Mm-hmm. At the moment, I think it's a real concern.
I would give it, that was a constructive engagement indeed for looking at the future. Just on the sort of work that's got to happen. I mean, the committee's heard at times that there's no way to net zero without going through the homes of the poor. And the committee's heard evidence that supply chains are reluctant to engage with many retrofit support schemes due to rising cost and unrealistic cost assumptions. And increased supply costs mean that cost assumptions for many support schemes no longer reflect market conditions. And how do you intend to make the schemes more economic for delivery partners?
Yeah, I can come in on
I'm
that
happy
one.
to any one of the three of you to provide the evidence.
Yeah, so I mean we're certainly aware of the challenges around costs, and this has become a particular issue on the Great British Insulation Scheme.
Yeah.
Suppliers do have.
When you're aware of the challenges around costs, what can you do?
Well, suppliers have targets under that scheme. We have requested to see their delivery plans. We're examining those plans in quite a bit of detail at the moment to understand if they're feasible and achievable.
How long is that time period? I mean, so if I'm doing this, just for the costs that things have changed, it's unrealistic. You're now doing something to change that. I mean, I'm waiting, meantime, with my installers to wait for you to come and tell me.
I mean, this is an ongoing piece of compliance work that we will be doing over the duration of the scheme. So we requested the plans last November. Suppliers have an interim deliverable at the end of March. And we expect to be working really closely with them to understand the weaknesses in the plans and the areas for improvement. We certainly haven't taken anything off the table in terms of compliance and enforcement tools around this, but ultimately the costs of the scheme and the impact assessment costs of the eco scheme are a matter for government to decide on.
Okay. If I move on just a little bit to Nell Kenward. In 2021 you told a predecessor committee that Ofgem needed greater clarity around key technologies to support the rollout of low-carbon heat, such as hydrogen, heat pumps or what have you. Do you have that clarity now?
We don't yet have that clarity. So, as
you're 3 years.
As you're probably aware, Chair, the government has said it will decide on the role of hydrogen in home heating in 2026. Yeah. We think if there is the possibility for the government to make an earlier decision, that would be helpful for us because we've got to plan the networks, both the electricity network and the gas network, and how they're going to develop over time. And the decision on what's the preferred technologies for decarbonising heating in homes is quite an important input into how we help develop and regulate those networks.
The UK knows it's going to make a decision. 2021 you didn't have the clarity. By 2026 a decision might be made, maybe by Mr Garner if he's Energy Minister. Who knows? This doesn't really look like someone that's taking this seriously and going to move at pace or net zero targets, whatever.
So I suppose it is important when making such a huge decision to ensure it's informed by evidence. And I know the government's been running trials, and in fact our innovation funding has paid for a lot of those trials of hydrogen and other sort of technologies. So it's important that evidence is gathered and considered before what could be a very large and one-way decision before that's made. I think it's wise to be taking that approach, but as I say, it might be now the trials have closed that the government can come to a view sooner than 2026.
I mean, you can see that there's a difficulty here, and obviously you guys as a regulator, and I often see government blame things for you, towards your direction. I've in the past dealing with interconnector issues to the Hebrides. Ofgem, I'll say the government dictate our structure, and the two can play off against each other. But you've got 2021 and 2026, but meantime, those are in the supply chain. What are they meant to do? It'll be 2026 before they can meaningfully start to do anything serious as they wait for this decision, which will mean it'll be estimated 2028. So it will then be 7 years since the former committee asked.
It's worth noting that obviously the heat pump transition, if you like, they are being rolled out. The BUS scheme is sort of up and running and making progress on that. And in terms of our decisions as regulator, there are some decisions that we can proceed with on a sort of low regrets basis. Okay. Indeed, when we consulted on the methodology in December last year, we put out a consultation on the methodology for future gas network regulation, for example. And we talked about what might happen in a world of a declining gas use and how we might need to accelerate depreciation in that world. So we've put out some ideas that we are getting views on and able to make progress on. But as I've said, and I'll continue to say, the greater clarity we have earlier from government, the easier it is for us to provide.
What do you think the bottleneck is in government to reach something before 2026?
I couldn't speculate. I can imagine they have, as I say, they're in that process of gathering evidence.
Okay. We hear a lot of what's going on in the department.
Can I just come in on hydrogen?
I will collate after Mick Whitley. Yes, indeed, yeah. You can, yeah.
It is rather confusing when we're talking about, the conversion. When you're talking about heat pumps, how many have been rolled out?
Under the boiler upgrade scheme, we've had currently we've issued £76 million worth of vouchers this up until the end of February, which accounted for 35,000 odd applications.
Heat pumps?
Yeah.
5,000 heat pumps are going to get installed up to now?
That's how many vouchers we've received in this year.
We're in the low tens of thousands as a country in terms of heat pump installation.
We seem to be behind the curve, then, don't we?
So, yes, you can. As I said earlier on, when the scheme was set up, you will see an S curve in terms of the outrun. So the early adopters, slow numbers. We expect those numbers to accelerate as the supply chains come in, and that's the point of the policy. Our role as the scheme administrator is to set up the processes so people can apply for those vouchers. We make that as easy as possible. We liaise with various trade bodies to ensure that process is as easy as possible for everybody to go through. We've digitised the process to make it easy and helpful for people to go through. Ultimately, the decision on the amount of money, that does rest with government. That's a government decision, it's not for us. But our role is the administration of the scheme.
Okay, let me ask you another question then. So there's 35,000 applied, right? So how much discounts is it? Is it a sliding scale of what they get off the government, or is it one fixed price?
It's fixed currently, so 7,500 for a ground source or air source heat pump and 5,000 for a biomass boiler.
So 7,000 and the heat pump costs say 12,000. The user got to find £5,000. Yeah. So if there's going to be a lot of people who can't afford that.
Well, I think we're starting to see the supply chain respond. The production's going up and costs are coming down. So
finance schemes.
Seeing installations for as little as £500 at the moment.
See, for those people, I mean, if I could imagine somebody who's maybe an early adopter of a heat pump and say this person got the heat pump 14, 15 years ago, are they eligible for that scheme, or are they out in the cold, as it were?
Declare your interest.
And declare my interest, I should be there. I thought I made it obvious enough, yeah.
No, you wouldn't be eligible under the...
I need to give myself a gas boiler in an intervening period, then come back and get the scheme.
You have the benefit.
You have. Rich Crofton. Right. Just on this heat pump thing, just very quickly, sorry. The four of us were in Denmark, in Copenhagen, looking at this heat distribution network, and an incredibly basic back of the envelope calculation reckoned that if the government redeployed the £7,500 per heat pump for every house into a heat distribution network, you would save huge amounts of money or get more houses covered. Why on earth are we mucking around with this? I mean, if we're prepared to spend £7,500 per house, wouldn't it be better to do heat distribution networks where it works out cheaper per house to do it and have centrally produced heat on a much more efficient basis, salvaging heat from cement works or from power stations?
I believe there is a fund, a central government fund to support heat network development and rollout. And the reality is, I'm sure you appreciate, is some districts will be very suitable for heat networks, but some really
won't. I appreciate. I mean, if you're an isolated house, then clearly a heat pump is a much better idea. But you've got thousands of Victorian terraces all around South London and East London, absolutely perfect for this.
So will the heat networks be the solution for them, or will heat pumps be the solution for them? Will either offer be? I mean, if you have some going off in heat pumps, presumably you're losing the network possibilities.
And that's the importance of the local area plans to actually start to define the areas where the optimal different sources of heat.
And will they do that? Because I mean, some consumers might want, I want a heat pump, but I want this, and you know, if you get that too much autonomy, we'll have nothing at all.
And that's where the whole public participation and consumer engagement is going to be so vital to this transition, because we have a collective action challenge on an issue that is, a lot of people care enormously about how their homes are heated, and it is going to be, I think, a challenge that this committee and indeed ourselves will keep coming back to over the coming years.
Mike, some of these things, I have promised Mark Posey quite a while ago to take him in, so I want to make good on my promise.
The issue of hydrogen and Ofgem's role in dealing with the future of the gas network, because consumers in the UK have paid for all of these pipes, the big pipes running up and down the country and the pipes to everybody's house, and they've paid for that through their gas bills. Now, it would seem to me sensible to consider whether we can use that infrastructure, which we've already paid for the use of hydrogen, and that we need a decision on that promptly. But in the event that we weren't to pursue hydrogen as a method of home heating, what role would Ofgem play in ensuring the safe commissioning of the system? Because once people have detached from that grid and are no longer paying for their gas, you haven't got a customer to pick up the costs of decommissioning. So what thought have you given to that, and what will be your role?
That's an extremely important and actually timely question, because if the government decides that hydrogen isn't going to play a major role in home heating, and so gas network, at least at that distribution sort of local level, is going to become unnecessary, then there will need to be a national conversation about decommissioning.
Who should pay for it?
That's going to have to be part of the conversation. There will be costs, and one of Ofgem's objectives is to have that conversation, begin that conversation, prepare for it, and indeed look at ways in which we can minimise those costs of decommissioning, if indeed that's the route that the government chooses to go down.
Is government aware of the costs of decommissioning, do you think?
I suspect the relevant officials will have at least clocked the issue and started to consider those points, yes.
And will there be a role for Ofgem in that?
I think we are likely to have a role working with government, working with the sector on thinking about what's the best way to manage declining use of a gas grid if that's the scenario we end up in.
Just before coming to Barry Garner, just leaping along with Mark Posey, I think you're finished, Mark Posey. Just on a point there, you mentioned in hydrogen. If the gas network did not exist on mainland UK and parts of rural UK, would there be any consideration given to using hydrogen in pipes to homes or not? I mean,
as in laying down a new...
Yeah, I mean, is hydrogen just something that we're going to have this pipe, we've got this asset sort of there, and let's put something in it. So the thought is hydrogen, because the other is a costly decommissioning, and there's an asset, a stranded asset, if you like. I mean,
yeah, and I think the calculation that the government will have to make, one of the reasons it's complicated, is there is this opportunity to repurpose the gas grid. I mean, I think it's not as simple as simply putting hydrogen down the existing pipes. It's a different molecule. It needs to be...
Escape differently.
The pipes and indeed the devices would need to be checked and possibly upgraded for compliance with the hydrogen.
Many in the hydrogen area, gas area, will say that's not overly difficult, not insurmountable, is what they've told us and will tell us.
And that indeed is that's the choice the government needs to make. So there is an existing gas grid that could be repurposed, or there's a case for heat pumps. And
there's a tension, I've noticed, between both camps, because one of the camps will tell me the best thing you can do with hydrogen is take it to a power station, burn it, and make electricity with it. We send in the wires to provide heat out of heat pumps and make it a 3-to-1 gain rather than a 90%.
Absolutely so. That you've put your finger on one of the key sort of balances to identify.
We're well aware of the high wire that we ourselves have with this as well. Barry Gardner.
Yeah, I just wanted to take us back to a very simple question. That was around the heat pumps, because you said there were 35,000 vouchers that have been given out. How many heat pumps have actually been installed?
So it's 20,000 odd heat pumps that have been installed, but there are sort of 35,000, including those that are in train, current applications in train.
That's 20,000 last year, or in the scheme?
Since the beginning of the scheme in May 2022.
Very few. That's really very few. I mean, what's France doing? 600,000?
Very few, Chair, but I think it's probably still an overestimate. But there we are.
There are also heat pumps being installed under other schemes. I mean, the boiler upgrade scheme is one of a number of sources of support. For example, through the energy company obligation, heat pumps are feasible.
There's no one-stop shop like France has. Sorry, Mr. Gowrie.
No, you go.
I mean, France is this one-stop shop. They're in purpose, and it's back to sort of Lloyd Russell Moyle's question at the beginning, where he read out a list of schemes and he got to the end and he pointed out he forgot what he read out at the beginning a few seconds before. And that seems to be an issue in the UK, that there's a plethora of stuff, whereas in France there's a purpose, there's...
Well, the boiler upgrade scheme is a retrofit scheme, as is the energy company obligation. So through the Future Home Standard, government is trying to sort of drive up the uptake of heat pumps in new builds as well.
Future Home Standard, and we've got EPCs.
Would you say it could be done better in the UK?
Future. That's what we should have been doing in the past.
I mean, this is not something to put you on the spot as Ofgem, but could things be done better in the UK than they're currently being done as regard just the heat pump rollout at the moment? I mean, you guys, and I do know, speaking to some people in your organisation, you do come up against walls of frustration. You're given certain parameters by government. Government will use you as a sort of a shield at times. Other times they'll leave you hanging out to dry, if you like. But you must come across areas where you think this could be done an awful lot better, because you work on this day to day. And you know, the heat pump rollout isn't impressive in the UK. It's in bits. As the word mess was used by one of my colleagues just a second ago, fairly or unfairly. But what are your thoughts?
I mean, it's absolutely for government ministers to decide where they put the sources of support. I think one of the really positive things about the boiler upgrade scheme is its simplicity of offering, and that's easily understandable by consumers. And it's perhaps sort of easier for the supply chain to engage in that respect as well. I
mean, look, the only way that Lloyd's actually got traction on that scheme was by hugely increasing the grant, but not increasing the overall amount of money. And it's not your problem. You're administering the scheme. So there are going to... You know, if you've doubled the amount of money available to the individual, but you haven't doubled the amount of money available from government, you're halving the number of boilers that you project are going to be delivered. And even then, I would say, not delivering on those.
Well, that's a nice statement from Mr. Callanan. Lord Russell Moyle.
I mean, I know. I think you said 1,000. Did you say 1,000? Installed. There were 1,000 installed.
1,000 installers registered on the boiler.
And there's 150,000 plumbers in the UK. So 1,000.
Are they currently registered?
Yeah, 1,000.
0.75%, is it?
So a tiny fraction of people. And so you've said you've made the scheme easy to access, but you can only access it through this kind of getting through the eye of a needle, kind of getting one of these suppliers. Have you made representations to government that these schemes are confusing and difficult for people? And have you asked government for the ability to merge these schemes into one pot? And if not, why have you not asked for that?
So no, we've not asked the government to merge these schemes into one pot.
So I assume that you then support these multiple pots of schemes. You think that's a good idea?
So there is a difficult journey to net zero, and we as I've said before, our objective is to try and make that as easy as possible with the schemes that we operate on. There is work going on with government to try and ensure that a consumer wishing to get on that journey gets to a front door, and we are happy to work with them, but it's not our role
very briefly
simply to do that.
The taxpayer pays for all of these. Eco4 paid for by the taxpayer through their bills. All the other things by an addition on their bill, all paid for by the same person in the end. So why do you think there's an advantage to having confusing and separate schemes rather than having one scheme? Because you're not advocating for one scheme.
I mean, the schemes themselves are targeted at very different groups of customers.
They're all failing.
I mean, Eco4 is well within target, and we've seen a significant increase in uptake on the boiler upgrade scheme since the grant was increased, and government have committed to a further 3 years of funding, taking it up to 2028.
Eco met 3% of its overall delivery target in the first 8 months of its latest iteration. That's not a success. 3%. In its latest iteration?
Well, there are two versions of the scheme.
Yes.
One that's Eco4, which is...
And one that's a success.
Well, the Eco4... the Eco schemes have generally had a really good track record of meeting their overall targets. We've only seen suppliers narrowly miss the obligation on a very sort of limited number of occasions, and we've stepped in to make sure that's corrected. So over the sort of 10 years that we've administered those schemes, they have had a really good track record of achieving the policy goals.
It's just the latest iterations.
Gary.
Just following on from all of this stuff, and I do want to sort of get into something slightly different, but before we do that, I feel terribly sorry for you because you've got an entire select committee barrelling in with difficult questions. Are you loyally defending mistakes by the government or too complicated things by the government, or are you responsible yourselves for these 11 or 15 or whatever it is different things that come up? Are they your ideas or are they somebody else's ideas that you're delivering?
So let's be clear. Our role in this is we are the scheme administrator. So the policy decision and the funding for each of these is for government. At the point that they
if the administration is rubbish, we can give you a hard time. But if the schemes that you're trying to administer are rubbish, and you're doing your best and you're being loyal.
And what I would say is, at the point when the policy's been decided, we absolutely will respond to consultations. We will use our knowledge and experience of administering these schemes. We talk to consumers, we talk to users of schemes, talk to administrators, to trade bodies. So we've got a lot of inherent knowledge right around it. So we will try to help and we will try to influence it. Ultimately, it's a government decision. When they decide the administration may come to us, it may come to other bodies in the administration world, and it's our job to try and do as good a job as possible to make it as easy as possible for people to access the funding, the support that's available to them, and we have to take on that responsibility of managing that government money.
Very useful. You've got the Minister coming in next, so in about half an hour, I think, haven't we? So my friends over there will give them a really hard time. We'll just give them a slightly hard time this time. Look, can I just sort of turn to some of these sort of renewables and social programs you're doing? I think there's 11 which are being done on behalf of the government. But we are the Electrical Contractors Association told us that of these 7 Ofgem administered schemes that directly charge electricity and gas suppliers, 4 of them exclusively burden electricity suppliers, while just 1 of them, the green gas levy, singularly affects gas suppliers. Is there not a possibility that by doing, again, I appreciate you're the administrators rather than the people who decide it, but is there not a possibility you'll get a distortion of the market where one side is being overly supported or regulated or whatever it happens to be, whilst the other is not? Do you worry that you can disadvantage or advantage electricity over gas with this?
So this is partly, I think, a question about the relative prices between the two and where the burden of policy costs lie. Those are, as you imagine, decisions made by government, and I suspect in each case there'll be a logical reason why they are given, and most of them are probably to do with electricity, and that's why the costs are sit on the electricity bill more than the gas bill. But I know the government has been looking at, can they rebalance the burden of...
This is a legacy issue as much as anything.
Yeah. I think it's accumulated over many years, and it is that rebalancing question is one I know that the government's very live to. They want they want heat pumps, for example, to be cost competitive or more cost competitive, cheaper to run than gas boilers. And I think in some cases they already are. I think it's quite level at the moment.
They're not cheaper to deliver than
There's the capital cost as well, of course.
Yeah, that's right. Look, on EPCs, in your written evidence, you noted that reforming EPCs could help consumers make more informed decisions and better determine eligibility for support schemes. Could you sort of enlarge on that and where, Laura, perhaps?
Yeah, we sort of recognise the challenges with EPCs, and you've heard a lot about that in these hearings. They're not a perfect metric, but at the moment they probably are the best proxy that we have for the energy efficiency of a home. So we do use them on our schemes as a sort of...
If you say you could improve, how would you improve?
I think
they could be improved.
Better alignment with the net zero goals, which I think government has recognised and is acting on through its consultation of the home energy model, which is refreshing the physics model that supports decisions around EPCs. What I would say is that although we do use them under the schemes as one determinant of eligibility, it's never the sole criteria. Right, and for example, on the eco scheme, that the PAS 2035 assessment that an installer is required to do ahead of an installation and afterwards offers this assurance to customers that those heat reduction targets are being met and the solutions are the right solutions for the home.
Okay, so they're an okay fudge at the moment, but something better is coming along in due course. And in the meantime, you can get around. Yeah, okay, it's useful. And then, do you guys have a view on how best to rebalance the relative cost of gas and electricity, and what steps do you think can be made to do this?
We don't have an Ofgem view in a sense. It's not our policy area. I think what we...
Would you advise government?
I think the key thing I'd say is that we think there is scope for innovation to bring down the costs of the low carbon alternatives to gas heating, and we're already seeing that in heat pump development.
With domestic standing charges then?
There is a question around standing charges. I'm very happy to talk about that as well. That is something we've opened up a consultation on because we recognise the strength of feeling around it, and there are important considerations both in terms of distributional implications but also climate change implications. So you're right, that's an important issue.
You said a bit earlier that you advise the government to report back and talk to them about it. What is the government doing that's making you tear your hair out? What would you really like them to listen to you about that they're not listening to you about?
Well, as I mentioned before, the decision on the role of hydrogen in heating is something we'd like them to bring forward from 2026. That's a key one for us. I don't know if there's anything particularly on... Yeah.
If each of you have got a pet, why didn't they listen to me? Point.
I mean, we talk to government a lot about the issues that we see on the schemes around consumer protection and particularly the sort of limitations of relying just on the standards bodies. And I know government are thinking very carefully about the recommendations of the CMA in this space. So hearing their thoughts on that would be really valuable.
Okay, useful.
Neil too. To say exactly the same thing as Laura just said. And that's the one for us that's really important from a delivering schemes perspective.
I can add a second if that's helpful.
Go on.
As we are seeing more and more heat pumps, and if that is the route the country goes down, the importance of heat storage and smart controls on heat pumps is going to be absolutely vital. Because if everybody switches on the heat pump at the same time, 5 to 6 in the morning to warm up the house and have hot water for a shower, that will have huge pressure on the national system.
Have you been to Copenhagen to have a look at?
Unfortunately not, but
get yourself over there. There's in the first instance, Google State of Green and have a look at what they're doing. But this is where they're talking about all this, and actually, as soon as you have a distribution network of heat becomes a very viable energy storage mechanism. It is heat pumps. Yeah, I'm convinced. Anyway,
you mean water?
Yeah, I think you talked about
heaters.
Bodies of water holding heat for a year and losing 5% of the energy, which I think came back
with
quite surprising.
With the smart controls on heat pumps, what does that look like when someone does want to turn their shower on at the time that they want to turn it on and not the time that you want to turn it on?
I can imagine it would be like the smart controls on charging
all the time.
electric vehicles, where the customer...
The shower example is a good one, because the customer wants the shower only when they want the shower. They don't. There's not much flexibility when people want the shower.
So the key thing would be pairing it with heat storage. So you'd build up your hot water reservoir.
Back to hot water tanks.
I think that could be an important part of it. But there's new ways of heat storage that
none of the which is less about smart controls. That's more about tanks. But
it's the two together: heat storage and smart.
Does the boiler upgrade scheme allow spending on hot water tanks within that?
Good question.
I would.
I don't know. I mean, it's a genuine question.
Some heat pumps, it comes as a big unit with a tank inside.
That would be if that's future-proofed. That would be important to know.
Certainly in the heat pump.
He nods from behind, so I'm hoping that it is.
Heat pumps from 14 years ago had big water tanks inside them. So, just before we end, I didn't really do proper justice to the Economy 7 night rates, and if I can return to that. I mean, the committee heard in its last evidence session from that EDF customers, and this was from Fuel Poverty Action, and that's one of the reasons in preparing for winter, because of fuel poverty and energy poverty. We unanimously said that we shouldn't have standing charges in electricity, you might remember from that report. But away from that, in its last evidence session, we heard that EDF customers on Economy 7 night rates saw their energy bills almost double in January. This had been reported more widely in the media. Jonathan Bean told the committee that Ofgem did nothing in response, even though it had powers to intervene. He said that vulnerable groups are not being protected, and Ofgem is really just not tracking these things in the way it should be. And it would be helpful to hear from Ofgem if they've taken any action in this instance, and if they're empowered to do so. So this is particularly EDF customers in the Economy 7 nights.
All suppliers have an obligation to treat their customers fairly, so that gives us quite a broad remit to...
He says they haven't.
hold suppliers to account. What I suspect EDF would say, and I believe they're right in this case, is they are within the price cap regulations in terms of the balance of charges, and it might be that certain customers with certain consumption patterns have now seen a big increase in their bills due to the way they use their electricity.
Do you not maybe have had another line in to say that you can only increase this from a certain point by 10% maximum, rather than overnight 100% doubling?
So I'd have to look into the details of the 100% doubling, and it may be, as I say, due to specific sort of consumption patterns of certain individual consumers.
So that we can future-proof this so people don't get those shocks, because that's a shock.
It surely is, yes. And look, it's really helpful when cases like this are raised to our attention. We can then investigate with the supplier concerned and just check that they are, fulfilling their duties and obligations in line with the supplier line.
And even if they have been within the current rules, it might be advisable to change the rules for future so that this can't happen to people.
This is an area I think we, as I mentioned before, as the proliferation of more complicated tariffs comes onto the market, I think we will need to make sure we're really taking a close look at these market developments, making sure consumers are not suffering.
I mean, I think from the committee's point of view and from the committee and from the point of view of Fuel Poverty Action, it's on Ofgem that's responsive, and an Ofgem that's iterative. When things are happening, you're prepared to react and you can see that issue. I mean, obviously what's happened has happened, but what we're looking for is steps for the future that it can't happen again. They may well have been within the parameters. They may well have been a victim of their own success for keeping the energy price down for so long. I don't have the details myself either. But we can do on this hand or the other hand and play devil's advocate or whatever. But there are points that we're looking for: a responsive Ofgem, and a weak Ofgem, an Ofgem that sees something happened and is prepared to have some steps. And for that, we would be grateful.
We should absolutely be looking into cases like this, just to check that they are within the rules. And if you'd like, we can come back to you on this specific case.
Yeah, I think it'd be worth going back to them on that specific point, because I raised it very specifically. Ofgem, can we thank you for the last hour? It was useful, and hopefully we've given you food for thought. Things that should be happening in the energy space, please feel free to have a dialogue with us. If you think there are things we aren't covering or aware of, always make us aware of them. Likewise, I'm sure members here won't shy away from making you aware of things as well. We're going to suspend now for half an hour because the Minister and the Lords, before he comes, is busy, and we'll now go into private session. So, order.
Order. Much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Currently suspended. The proceeding is 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 currently suspended. The proceeding.
Only 1,000.
Yeah, that's right. Ready to do that. Okay. Let's go. Okay. Live. Done. Okay, order. Thank you. Second session of our inquiry. Today we've got Lord Callanan here and David Capper. Introduce yourself, please. Is what level you are in the department? What do you do in the department?
Certainly, Chairman. I'm the Minister for Energy Efficiency and Green Finance, with responsibility for clean heat, domestic decarbonisation, etc., which I think is what you want to talk about. And accompanying me is David Capper, who's our Director in charge of clean heat in the department.
Excellent. Thank you for coming along. I believe you've had a busy afternoon in the House of Lords, which is...
I apologise for... I realised I was supposed to be here at 2 o'clock, but I had to answer an oral question, so I hope the committee will forgive me for being late.
No, that's fine. I've got a couple of points just to raise with you quickly, the concerned bodies. But currently the government's flagship programme, Eco4, is set to expire in 2025, and there's been no commitment from the government to extend it. This only further imperils efforts to upgrade most inefficient UK homes, since causing uncertainty in the retrofitting industry and what guarantees of work they'll have in the future. It's a pipeline question, really. It would be very useful to understand the position, whether the scheme will be extended, and what you can say about it, about Eco4 and its progress.
Well, Eco4 is one of our most successful schemes. As you know, it's the clue's in the name. It's the energy company obligation. So it's an obligation placed on the energy suppliers to deliver energy efficiency improvements across the piece. It's currently worth about £1 billion per year. It's been going in different incarnations since the early part of the previous decade, and has delivered millions of measures across the country.
Will it continue after 2026?
We haven't made no final decisions yet. We have to have, obviously, discussions with our Treasury, etc. But I absolutely give the committee it's a very good scheme. It's been delivering. It's been around for...
There's a supply chain out there that needs certainty.
Yeah, it is one of many different schemes that we have. I'm sure we'll explore this during the question session, and we will endeavour to provide certainty as quickly as possible.
See, all morning we heard from people such as Siemens and British Ports and Rolls-Royce about certainty in government. This is a comparatively small area.
No, it's not a comparatively small area, Chairman. It's one of our biggest schemes. It's £1 billion.
It's a comparatively small, not complex decision, because you've had this in the past. It's not new.
But it has to be taken in the context of, obviously, it's an obligation on suppliers, so it's effectively bill funded. So we need to look at it across the piece about other obligations that we might want to place on bill payers.
And National Energy Action's poverty...
I agree with your point, Chairman, about the importance of providing long-term signals, and it's one of the things that I've been trying to concentrate on. So getting agreement with the Treasury for £6 billion worth of taxpayer funding from 2025 to 2028, and we've set out the details of how that would be applied across all of the different schemes, I think goes some way to providing the certainty that suppliers want, and I agree with you on that.
Yeah, because 2026 isn't far away as far as they're concerned. National Energy Action's report found that to meet the UK's poverty targets, a further £18 billion was needed, yet in the current trajectory the government will fall short with this legally binding target by staggering 3 million households in 2030. By introducing increased minimum energy efficiency standards in the private rented sector, as much as 78 billion could be raised to close the gap. With the government rolling back on these standards last year, how does it plan to meet the fuel poverty targets without them?
So we're currently looking at the full implications across the piece, across all the different schemes, about how we meet what is extremely important is the fuel poverty targets. I'm happy to go into more details about the decisions that we made on private rented sector energy efficiency standards, if you would like, because it's it was a decision that we wrestled with for a long time. These things are always a balance. I'm sure members are aware of the difficulties that exist in the private rented sector at the moment. And sorry,
I'm just going to say, I think the point is money and decision making, so people know certainty. If you haven't got the funding there to meet the targets, you have to up the funding, surely.
Well, I mean, it's the target, I think, is that we have to meet to eliminate fuel poverty by 2030. So, as I said, just announced we spent 6 billion over this Parliament. We have 6 billion from 2025 to 2028 already agreed. And we need to look at the full implications of rolling out all these schemes that they will have on the fuel poverty targets. I mean, do you want me to go into the rationale of what?
No, I'm happy with that. I mean, I think what we're looking for is government to be making decisions, really, is the point of the two questions. Can just
making decisions. I might agree with the decisions, but we have to be making decisions.
Certainly on the Eco 4, there was anyway. Can I ask, what does the government believe that those living in homes rated EPC band C or above cannot be in fuel poverty?
Well, I don't think we've ever said that is the case. I mean, C is the target that we've aimed for and that we're aiming to reach, because there are many homes that are still below target. I mean, I think the figures at about 2010, there were 17% of properties in the UK were below C. Now we have about 50% of properties that are C or above. We need to make a lot more progress on that, but I think it is possible for people to be in fuel poverty but still be in more efficient homes. I mean, we've all seen the energy price rises of recent years.
Can you give us a clear
contribution?
Can you give us a clear timeline of when the government will publish its updated fuel poverty strategy?
I can't give you a timescale for that at the moment. We are looking at it. It's something that's at the top of our in tray. It's very important, but we have to look at the implications across the schemes that I mentioned, the implications of the decisions on the private rented sector and how that will affect the fuel poverty targets.
I mean, again, it's just back to decisions and timelines and seeing what's happening. And, I mean, I'm not really asking for it to be published. I'm just sort of looking when it'll be updated. Well, I mean, when decisions we need.
Well, as I said, we just announced the funding towards the end of last year. After lots of negotiation with the Treasury, we need to look at the full implications of that and the effect that it has on fuel poverty. There are obviously a lot of moving parts. There's money that we're spending on the social housing decarbonisation fund. Clearly, fuel prices coming down helps us towards that objective, but there is a lot more that we need to do. I readily admit that.
Okay, so we're waiting for the clear timeline as to when the fuel poverty updated fuel poverty strategy will be published. What plans does the government have to encourage innovative business models to support consumers with costs of home improvement?
So I think the question that is more into the green finance strategy. There are a lot of quite interesting developments. We have a number of green finance accelerators that we are funding with some of the financial institutions. There's some really interesting models coming forward as to how things like clean heat and others can be financed. The concept of heat as a service, particularly prevalent, of course, under things like heat networks, which we need to substantially expand if we're to meet our targets. So there's a lot of developments going on in this sector, and we are funding a number of interesting innovations. There are regular seminars and others that we have with the private sector, and some great schemes coming forward. Barclays, for instance, to pluck one at random that I was speaking to last week, have a scheme where they offer grants to their mortgage customers to help them to improve the energy efficiency of their properties.
Just before I finish up and pass on, this committee has heard from some given evidence saying that there's no way to net zero for the UK unless it goes through, there's no route to net zero for the UK unless it goes through the homes of the poor, and those homes have to be insulated. Would you agree with that assessment?
I would agree with that. Yeah, I mean, I think not necessarily the poor, everybody's homes. The UK has the biggest problem in Europe in that, as a consequence of the Industrial Revolution, we have the oldest property in Europe. Much of it is poorly insulated. We have, I think the figures are 6 million homes that were built before the First World War, many of them single-skinned, and so we have the biggest problem in Europe, but it is something that we need to take action on. I think we are across the piece. I'd always like to be doing more, always open to new ideas and suggestions, but one of the most effective things that we can do to relieve fuel poverty is to insulate homes.
And then the reason I mentioned the homes of the poor in particular, than just all homes, is because it might be more difficult for the poor themselves to do something.
That, of course, is why the vast majority of our schemes, Eco, Hug, etc., sorry to use the acronyms, them out if you want, they are all targeted at, the vast majority of them are targeted at those on the lowest incomes.
Thank you. Barry Gardner.
Lord Callanan, I think you know that I believe that bipartisanship is really important in reaching net zero. I want to talk about some of the shortfalls in delivery, but I want to do it in a way that is not trying to apportion blame and go over old ground. I want to see what genuine learning we can have from the failures that there have been. We've seen the boiler upgrade scheme, 2/3 of it not spent. We've seen the home upgrade grant, less than a half spent. And if we're talking about fewer than 3,000 households that saw measures installed under the insulation scheme, the Great British Insulation Scheme, from its launch to the end of last year, yet at the moment the government's projecting that 300,000 households will benefit from that scheme by 2026. What are the learnings we need to take from those failures, and why should we have confidence that 2026 target of 300,000 homes is actually going to be met?
Okay, so a number of questions there. Firstly, I wouldn't classify those schemes as failures because we're not completed yet. So we're part of the way through them. So to take some of the schemes that you mentioned, the boiler upgrade scheme, for instance, initially rollout was poorer than we would like to. You'll have seen the announcement of the...
really genuinely didn't want to get into a... failure, is it not? I used the word... Let's absolutely
agree with the spirit in which the question was phrased, and you deserve an answer to that. So in terms of the boiler upgrade scheme, for instance, we looked at that. We've increased the levels by 50%, so up to 7,500. So we now have one of the most generous capital grant schemes in Europe, and I think deliveries increased by 13.9%, I think, year on year, as a direct result of that. There are other things that we need to do as well to extend.
I'm genuinely interested. I don't want to break the flow, but just on that point, whilst that's right, it has seen an increase in the uptake, and that's very welcome. The overall funding package has not increased, so the implication would be that your target of the number of new installations has halved because the individual grants have doubled.
Well, it didn't quite double, it increased by 50%, but yes.
Again.
So obviously within the original 450 million allocated, then that would, if all of that money was being spent, then we would have been able to do less, but it was apparent that we probably wouldn't have spent that money, and therefore we were able to increase the grant to increase delivery. Also, within the package that I mentioned of the 6 billion from 2025 to 28, 1.5 billion of that is allocated towards further capital grants for heat pumps. So we do have future money allocated in the next scheme as well. But one of the reasons, of course, for poor take-up is that there are other factors influencing the take-up of electrification of heat as well, such as price rebalancing. We need to proceed with that. So there are a number of other mechanisms that we also need to go to expand heat pump production in the future.
So in terms of the learning experience and the targets that we have for 2026, what do you think we should be highlighting as, things not to do in the future, things to be aware of that we should be doing in the future, and again, the confidence that we should have in that 2026 target of 300,000, given that we've only seen 3,000 to date. I mean, that's a huge...
So there are of course always lessons that we can learn from the various schemes. I think in terms of the heat pump rollout, the idea, so we moved away from the original version, which was a subsidy based over time, to a subsidy that was a straight-up capital grant. And I'm a great believer in trying to make the schemes as simple to access as possible. I think one of the problems that we have in One Learning is that many of the schemes were over-complicated and it was difficult for people to access. So trying to simplify them, having a simple, straight-up capital grant allocation, I thought was a better way of proceeding. We are now seeing an increase in uptake. I think one of the other lessons that we need to learn is the importance of it being as part of a package of measures. So we also need to do price rebalancing, however difficult that may be. We also need to do things like the clean heat market mechanism, other things that will also contribute to the uptake as well. So I think the ultimate answer to your question is it has to be a package of measures. You can't look at things in isolation.
Well, you lead me very nicely into my next question to you, really, because I know that the government is now proposing what it calls a front door to these schemes. In other jurisdictions, say in France, they have a one-stop shop model, not just a front door, but a one shop, because behind your one front door, there would still be those individual pockets. Whereas I think the way in which other jurisdictions have done it with real success is by having a one-stop shop where people can go, they can get the advice that is tailor-made to their own situation, they can access funds that will give them a result and deliver in any of these different areas. Would that be something that you would welcome as a way forward? Is it something that the government is considering? Or are you stopped at the front door, if I can put it that way?
Oh, I'm sort of trying to think of the analogy between a one-stop shop and a common front door, but I suppose a common front door into the shop would be maybe your shop is divided into different departments. But in essence, I agree with you. And we need to try and make things as simple to access as possible. And the team, I'm sure, would confirm that that's one of the points that I'm always going on about. We need to make it accessible to the man and woman in the street who is perhaps not averse with all of the different schemes and acronyms. And that is the purpose of the Common Front Door. So it's a website, find energy improvements on your home. It links to the EPC database. If there's already an EPC in existence for your property, there is an eligibility calculator built in as well. So you can go on, you can put your property details in. It will give you tailored advice. It will tell you if you are eligible for the eco schemes, for the Great British Insulation Scheme, for home upgrade grants, etc., without you even needing to know what these acronyms stand for or how you need to access it. It will then pass on your details, in the case of eco, to the energy suppliers, or in the case of HUG to one of the local authority who has taken part in the scheme. So the idea of that is to remove the complications, and because the different pots of money funded sometimes in different ways, people don't need to know that. They just need to know they can access.
There's allocated. How many people have gone onto the website, and how many of them have then translated that into a new set of either insulation or heat pump or some accessed it and delivered it? So is it actually working, or is it too techy? In France, they do this as literal shops where you can go speak to a person, have them in person or on the phone.
Well, you can access support on the phone as well for those that are not computer literate. In terms of numbers, do we have any numbers there? Several 100,000 is the answer to your question. But I don't know if we
with the numbers and what it delivered.
Could I just
very briefly? I'll move to Lloyd Russell Moylan.
Add very briefly to what the Minister was saying. I mean, your question's a very good one about if you put everything in a one-stop shop as you describe it. I mean, I think one of the issues with delivery is if you do that, then you're kind of changing the schemes that are running to then do something different. And one of the things that we've seen historically is that when you do that, you end up slowing down delivery. So we've got something like Eco, which was the subject of the first question, where we've had 3.8 million measures in 2.5 million homes over the last decade. If you were to kind of change that approach and do it differently, what you would see is that delivery would slow and it would take some time to come back up. So I think that is a consideration when you're thinking about whether it's best to do something completely different or whether you kind of put things behind the front door that then just makes it easier for consumers to access.
Lloyd Russell-Moyle.
I mean, but there's a huge problem with the current scheme. Eco fell by 59% in 2022. Is that not because we are getting to the stage where the easy fruit has been picked? You know, kind of housing associations, big landlords, people who are able to have those negotiations with you. And we are now at the stage where we're talking about private rented accommodation and private owners who, therefore, we do need not the continuation of a system that, you know, kind of the latest iteration of Eco has met 3% of its overall delivery target in the first 8 months. So, you know, these are low figures, and I get that things ramp up. Eco's gone down. Is there not a case to say people should be able to mix and match between these schemes? You know, we've got the Great British Installation Scheme, energy company, the eco schemes, the boiler upgrade schemes, but they all fundamentally are doing the same thing. And for a lot of people, they're eligible for 2 or 3 of the schemes. You can't actually have a holistic approach of saying, well, I can draw a bit of this pot down, a bit of this pot down. You're in the process, and then you're kind of stuck in it.
So, number of different points there. So, firstly, it is possible to match between the schemes. So, it is possible to, say, get a grant for a heat pump through the boiler upgrade scheme and get insulation measures delivered under GBIS or Eco 4. Secondly, I think you're confusing a couple of... Answer the question and you can...
Yeah, go on.
Possibly. So, it is possible to mix and match measures under the different schemes. Sorry? Well, you can do that through access through the website. You could apply for a boiler upgrade scheme grant, which is a simple one-off grant, and you can also access scheme if you were eligible. Obviously, you need to be on low income for the likes of Eco. You're also confusing it.
So the consumer doesn't apply for the grant. The consumer finds a supplier to supply. So it's not a case that the consumer can apply for grants and mix and match. There are only 1,000 installers on the boiler scheme we heard in the last panel that are registered. In the whole country, you've got to find, out of that 1,000, someone that's registered in all the different schemes to be able to mix and match and to be able to be available. That doesn't sound very exciting.
And we're looking at different schemes. I think there are about 1,300 installers registered under the MCS scheme. I'm sure officials will correct me if I'm wrong. I think in your initial question as well, I think you mentioned social housing and housing association providers. They are separate schemes. That is you're thinking of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, the latest iteration of we've just launched, working with local authorities, working with housing associations, and that's one of the extremely successful scheme. We've just launched the latest iteration, which is about £1.1 billion worth of government funding, amounts matched by local authorities and housing associations as well. With regard to your question about Eco 4, I'm afraid I didn't recognise the number of, I think you said 59%. My information is that Eco is on track. It's delivering exactly what we said it would. It had a slow start, but now build-up is pretty good and is delivering the measures that we thought with the cooperation of the energy suppliers.
Well,
there is an issue with GBIS, and again, I think it goes back to Mr. Gardner's question earlier and the points that David was making. I think we've seen historically the lessons that we've learned is all the schemes start off relatively slow, and then as people get used to them, access increases, the suppliers get used to delivering, delivery ramps up, and the figures are now higher for GBIS as well.
You're comfortable with the current situation of the scheme being successful and clear for... within your one-stop shop, within your...
There are always lessons that we can learn and things that we can improve, and I think I answered that with Mr. Gardner's question. There are always improvements. we're also, I mean, we're looking at the moment, for instance, and I think we consulted on it in terms of improvements to GBIS and ECO in the light of some of the feedback that we've been getting suppliers, and we will be launching some minor tweaks to those shortly to help with delivery.
At the moment, I've rung around all of the people recommended on the website when you fill in the details for ECO in Brighton, and all of them have said that there's no person to be able to deliver. All the energy suppliers looked at the house, fills the criteria, has someone who's on universal credit, etc., 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 and then you get through to the end part of the process. We've not got any installers in your area that are able to do it in a time frame. Is that not a real problem?
Potentially, I don't know the particular circumstances. If you'd like to write to me, I'll certainly have officials look at that. But
you're aware of across the country that there's not.
Obviously, it's an obligation placed on suppliers. So it's up to the suppliers to put in place the supply chains to deliver against it. You don't just have to use your own supplier. You can use an alternative supplier that also may be able to do the measures. But obviously, it's a private decision for them to take to complete their obligation. Well, the government doesn't become involved in that. So it's up to suppliers to decide whether the particular constituent of yours is eligible, has measures that could be delivered in a cost-effective manner, etc., etc., depending on the availability
all
in their
of
own
those,
supply
all
chain.
of those parts. It's about the supply chain. So the final thing that I want to ask you about on this section is, if one has a relationship with a plumber, and it's your trusted plumber, someone that you know that's worked on your house on and off for many years, and there are about 150,000 heating engineers, plumbers, allied people in this country, and on my figures from Ofgem, 1,000, on yours even 13,000.
1,300. It increased by 30% this afternoon.
Still 100.
1,300. We're still talking extremely low figures of that. Is there not a problem that consumers cannot go to their trusted plumber to access these grants?
Less than 1%.
They have to go to someone that's totally unknown to them, totally inaccessible, and might be a swindler, might not be. They just don't know.
If you're talking about the boiler upgrade scheme, which was the numbers that we were quoting, then provided their local plumber was registered with the microgeneration certification scheme, then absolutely they could use their local plumber. It's worth reflecting why we specify that installers have to be part of those schemes, and it is precisely because it's important that we get basic quality with a good installation that is subject to a long-term consumer guarantee. Part of the problem that we had in earlier iterations, and again goes back to Mr. Gardner's question, is for poor standards of installation. And I'm still getting letters from members, probably such as yourself, with people that have had poor quality work done maybe a decade ago. Cavity wall installation is the one that springs to mind. And of course, the installers are gone bust and are long gone by now, and there's no long-term follow-up and no guarantee in place. So the reason that we specify MCS certification, Trustmark installers, is precisely to provide that quality of workmanship and long-term guarantee, so there is proper consumer redress. And obviously that limits the number of installers. But the alternative, I might put it, is to have not Wild West scheme, but anybody accessing it, and then we haven't got the consumer guarantees in place. We've got no guarantee of quality workmanship. These things were always a difficult balance, but that's why we've gone down the Trustmark MCS route.
And you think, we've got the question is, do you think you've got that balance right? Because at the moment you've not got many registered.
But can I just come in on some of the numbers?
Okay, David, on you.
Because so it is true. There's about 1,300 installation companies under the.
Companies are plumbers.
So that's companies.
They've increased again.
Yeah. So it's the heat. Yeah.
It would be useful maybe if you could write to us with the breakdown, because the figures have been changing 3 times already today.
But it's good. You have seen the Heat Pump Association came out earlier this week, and they said there's about 8,000 at the moment installers who are qualified within the companies that we talk about. That is up from 3,000 in 2022. So we're on quite a rising trajectory. And you're right. And part of the reason for this is that we've put forward a heat training grant that provides an incentive for people to retrain. And you're right, I mean, there's about 110,000 gas heating engineers who can retrain within a week in order to be able to fit a heat pump.
This rate of increase by supper time, there's going to be about 50,000 of them.
But I think we're talking about different things, Chairman. So there's the number of companies that are registered, which is about 1,300, and within those companies, of course, there are a number of different employees. So about 8,000 employees were qualified.
Can we have it written? Yeah.
Written down.
Thank you. Because we'll have to go back and check with Ofgem on their figures as well, because from our understanding, we had 1,000 plumbers from Ofgem. Just moving on, Minister, why does the government continue to place environmental and social levies on electricity bills, despite the negative impact this has encouraging this switch to low-carbon heating, and also the iniquity, I might say, to people who live in rural and island areas who are not on mains gas? And I'm particularly thinking of island areas more than rural areas.
Do you want to declare an interest?
I do want to declare an interest. Yes, MP for Hilligan in here. Yes, definitely.
This is an extremely good question, Chairman, and one that I wonder about myself. It is, of course, a practice that was started by governments many years ago, and fundamentally it comes down to...
My constituents do a rebate then?
Let me explain the background to it and why we want to try and do something about it. But this is a historical thing that... this government and previous governments have tended to fund many of these measures, particularly under ECO, as well as many of the obligations to roll out renewables, warm homes discount, etc. Instead of funding it from general taxation, it's been levied traditionally on electricity bills.
Which is not fair.
I absolutely accept that. In addition, of course, the ETS also is levied on electricity production, and if it's not low carbon, but not on gas. And so putting all those things together, it contributes to a situation that we have in the UK where electricity is maybe 3 to 4 times for equivalent units the price of gas. So gas is cheap compared to electricity. If we're to further electrify heat, then of course we need to move forward what is called price rebalancing, which is the transfer. But I hope you will all accept the political difficulties of government taking a decision to effectively transfer levies from electricity onto gas, even if ultimately that's probably required on the decarbonisation journey.
That bitter pill would be better swallowed if there was some sugar with it, because the worst fuel poverty stats in the UK are in island areas of Scotland, which don't have the alternative to gas and which are paying these unfair legacy structures, if you like. Do you think the government does have a reparation to do that?
I think it's an absolutely fair point, and under the Skidmore review we committed to making progress on price rebalancing this year. We need to do a consultation and seek views on it. I'm sure you all accept, I'm a non-elected house, you're the elected members, but this is not an easy political decision for any government to make.
It's not easy,
but it is something. I absolutely accept the point from your constituents who are not on mains gas, that this is potentially unfair. And of course, if we are to electrify heat further and move forward with our heat pump target, then it's something that we will need to make progress on. Politically difficult, though, and you'll accept that it is.
Does the government remain committed to implementing the clean heat market mechanism in full?
Yes.
And does that include the Secretary of State?
The clean. Well, let me answer the question, then you can go back on it. So the clean heat market mechanism is, in my view, essential for a number of our targets. Firstly, to help to change the business model of the boiler manufacturers to selling more heat pumps. To, if we are to meet our target of 600,000 heat pumps a year, all the advice that I have received is that this is essential to doing that, and also to meeting our carbon budget. So it's absolutely something the government is committed to, and we need to move forward on.
You yourself, of course, have made the headlines with boilers and gas. What's the situation? Are you moving to heat pumps yourself, or are you still with gas?
I think nobody's being forced to move either way, Chairman. So this is about providing incentives and moving the market so that people have a voluntary choice to make, and it's certainly something I want to do myself in the future.
So you use gas at the moment?
I think my personal circumstances are not relevant to
Surely as an example, the Minister said in the... No?
No. We're here to talk about policy in general rather than individual.
When does the government plan to set out its plans of the feasibility of separating gas and electricity prices?
Sorry, say that again.
When will the government set out its plans on the feasibility of separating gas and electricity prices?
So what do you mean by separating prices?
I mean, I think we're talking about the
talking about the rebalancing issue that I've just been talking about.
I mean, surely there's some plan to separate that at some point and get. You have accepted it's unfair.
Well, as I said, we want to issue a consultation later this year, and we're committed to making progress on rebalancing this year.
So, we do expect a general election. Will that consultation happen regardless of the politics of the movement? Because something that maybe should be happening earlier to set it in train. Because if the polls are correct, there will be a change of personnel. Will this be dropped?
I can therefore get my successor along and ask him the same question. It is, we're in a fraught political environment at the moment. As I said, you're from the elected house. I'm not. This is a politically controversial issue. Frankly, whoever is in power, a government taking a deliberate decision to rebalance prices effectively by policy matters to increase the price of gas would be politically controversial in whatever circumstances. It's obviously going to be even more controversial in the run-up to a general election.
And my big takeaway here is the clean heat market mechanism is not going to be dropped by your department.
The clean heat market mechanism is essential to meeting our 600,000 target, to
here you're saying it's essential.
Carbon budgets.
And then because it's essential, it won't be dropped.
I mean, we will set out the details of exactly how it will be implemented in the near future, but I am absolutely clear that it is essential for all of these electrification targets going forward.
Okay, thank you for that. I hear you loud and clear. Lloyd Russell-Moyle.
On the EPC questions, yes? Yes, okay.
On the heat pumps.
No, I'll come to it. When will the government share its proposals for EPC and improving their methodology?
So this is a policy that sits within the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, and they are, I think, committed to moving forward with a consultation as soon as possible. I know we're certainly putting pressure on them to get that consultation issued as quickly as possible, because there is a problem with the EPC metrics at the moment, which you're probably going to come on to.
I mean, I was just going to say, do you agree that the carbon impact metric be introduced alongside EPC so that we can be clear on the cost versus the carbon?
Yeah, so the EPCs were introduced in the first place as a kind of easy rating for consumers to see, purchasers to see what a particular property was going to cost to run. Since then, they've morphed into a more general measure of energy efficiency. And of course, as we move towards a situation where the electricity system is increasingly decarbonised, you can end up potentially, depending on your particular circumstances, with the fairly perverse outcome where you could install electrification, a heat pump in your property, and your EPC could actually go down because of and it goes back to the issue of the difference between gas and electricity prices that I mentioned earlier.
Get that. And on the decent home standard in the private rented sector, it seems to be unclear. Are we committed to that in being introduced?
No, we're not.
No. So that is now scrapped. There's not a belief that we need decent homes and energy standards in the private rented sector?
This is the difficult issue that I was referring to in the introduction from the chairman. The difficulty that we faced was entirely about if you simply pass a regular. So at the moment, you have to have all private rented sector accommodation has to be minimum EPC E. We consulted on increasing that to C with a potential cost cap for landlords. I got lots of correspondence from housing officers, from other members of your house, talking about the potential implications for landlords of doing this. And at a time when there is already a shortage of private rented accommodation, imposing extra costs on landlords, which of course the tenants would get the rights for in terms of lower energy bills, is likely to drive more landlords out of the market and reduce the amount of private rented sector accommodation available. And I'm not pretending it's easy. It was one of the difficult balancing acts between, yes, it's relatively easy to just pass a regulation and say, improve the standards of your property by a certain date. But if that results in less property being available, and I had many letters from members of your house, particularly in rural areas, saying many landlords are saying they will just leave the market because of the difficulty of upgrading particular buildings, etc. And I'm not pretending it was an easy decision, but this is the balance that we had to had to draw on and the decision that we made.
I think I disagree with your analysis of the housing market. I think the problem is that the private rented sector has grown too much and is now double than it was 15 years ago, and the ownership sector has decreased, and people are stuck in the private rented sector and therefore can never get into the ownership sector. So people moving out of the private rented sector and meaning that we free up more houses to buy for people, young people, to live in permanently would, in my view, be a very positive thing. So I think we have a very different analysis on the basis of why you wouldn't want.
I think
that's a fair enough difference.
I think it's a fair point. I mean, I don't know the market in Brighton. I know the market in my own part of the northeast, the opposite end of the country. But of course, it varies a lot, and particularly in London. Of course, we know the shortage of accommodation.
These are political differences.
But I think that's an absolutely fair point.
Look, the government aims to install 600 heat pumps per year by 2028, but
600,000.
Pumps.
Bless you.
The current rates are about 1/9 of that. Why are we so off track?
So it goes back to the point that we were making earlier, and why we need to do a package of policy measures to increase that. I think we all saw the energy crisis of last winter, which was actually primarily caused, it was a gas price crisis because of the rise of international gas prices. I think it brought home the point more that we need to electrify heat. Heat pumps are by far the most efficient way of doing that. So we need to get the target up to 600,000 a year. In order to do that, we need all of the policy measures that I talked about earlier. We need price rebalancing, we need the boiler upgrade scheme, we need the clean heat market mechanism. We also support the installation of heat pumps under Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund and eco schemes and HUG schemes as well. So a package of policy measures is required because we absolutely do need to get more electrification of heat in this country.
Research shows that 1/4 of households would install a heat pump if it was free. I mean, effectively, we are offering almost free with some of the schemes. Would it not be better to change the schemes so it was just clear that if households wanted to switch, they'd get it for free?
Well, as you said, some of the schemes they do under the likes of the Social Housing Decarbonisation Fund, etc. And it's a balance, of course, in terms of the funding that's available. But of course, with the generous grants that we now have available, there's some quite exciting offers coming on the market from some suppliers that will offer to install it to you for a very small amount of money, possibly even less than the cost of a gas boiler. And we want that market to continue. We want the price of heat pumps to come down. But of course, equally important to the price of buying it in the first place is the cost of running it, which comes back to the Chairman's point earlier about rebalancing and adjusting the price of relative prices of gas and electricity.
Thank you.
Excellent.
Just following on from heat as a resource, a group of 4 of us recently visited the Copenhagen to go and have a look at the heat distribution networks, the local distribution networks. And a sort of, if I'm being entirely honest with you, back of a fag packet calculation worked out that it's a lot cheaper to have heat distribution as a resource than it is to subsidise the heat pumps. And I suppose my question is really about kind of what thought the government has given in terms of actually redeploying that money onto something which could be better. And of course I do appreciate that you have a problem. So a rural house in the middle of nowhere is completely ridiculous, and a heat pump is very suitable for that. But we've got, South London is full of Victorian terraces, which would be absolutely perfect for this. Have you had any thoughts and plans on this?
Very much so, and I've also visited Denmark and seen their rollout of heat networks, as they are known, or district heating systems, use the older analysis. And 2/3 of Denmark are now on heat networks. They're all funded, they're all mainly powered by biomass, I might add. And we have a very different history in the UK in terms of... Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, they're not. And actually, the thing that is particularly interesting about this is where, if your approach is that heat is a resource, suddenly you find heat everywhere. And so what they're doing is they're taking heat out of power stations. So we would have cooling towers, they would have heat extractors. They take heat out of drinking water. But also the other important point about this, which is why it becomes that much more significant, is that heat is also an energy storage mechanism. So if you have your North Sea wind farms producing a huge amount of excess energy, which we would otherwise pay not to be delivering, you redeploy that into heating these large, what they refer to as kettles, which actually look like kettles, but in storage, where you can store it and then deliver it at some point in the future. And it's an extraordinarily interesting... The minute you look at heat distribution through water as a resource, suddenly it solves a whole load of other different problems.
Absolutely agree with your points. I was going on to say that, and the advantage of heat networks is that you can access heat from a variety of different sources, and we are doing exactly that in the UK as well. And in fact, I think there's one in Mr Gardner's constituency, I think a heat network from, could be wrong, but I'll check the details of that. But yes, in the UK at the moment, we only have about 3% of heat networks. There's been a couple of problems with it. Firstly, historically, people have liked to have their own heating source on their own particular property. But it is absolutely the case that if we are to roll out heat decarbonisation in many inner city areas with flats, etc., individual heat pumps and individual properties are not going to be the solution. So we have to have more heat networks. We took powers in the energy bill for what is called heat network zoning, which will allow local authorities to allocate certain parts of their areas to a heat network zone and compel connections from likes of new buildings, from public sector buildings, etc., to provide the initial investment in the network to get it up and running. Because obviously we need a huge amount of investment to get them going. And there's about 20 local authorities across the country who are prepared to go with us on this. We've also funded from the Green Heat Network Fund a number of really innovative projects doing exactly what you mentioned. So in my own area in the northeast, there's some really good mine water extraction heat networks where they take from old mine workings, the water is quite warm, you take it, extract the heat and put it through a network. There's a new village being developed in County Durham, which is entirely heated by old mine workings. We've just funded a scheme in Cornwall, which is a geothermal scheme, which is similar, yes. And there are other experiments going on. So the estimates, I think, from the Climate Change Committee is that we need to get the country from 3% up to about 20% on heat networks if we're to decarbonise heating. So we have a long way to go to match up with Denmark, where 2/3 of the country is on heat networks, but absolutely take your point, and we've allocated substantial amounts of money. I think it's 1.25 billion over the period that I was talking about from 2025 to 28 to further support the development of heat networks.
As a sort of hybrid between sort of heat pumps and heat networks, is it not possible to mandate new build estates, for example, where you have 10, 15, 100 houses, whatever it happens to be, to have a heat pump for that estate, which is incredibly easy to do? Absolutely,
and that of course is what the Future Home Standard will do when it's introduced hopefully in 2025. That will effectively prohibit the installation of fossil fuel heating and new properties. And one of the potential solutions to that for new developers, instead of putting an air source heat pump at every property, you could put an array in the road and use ground source heat pumps in every home to provide the heating for them. So yes, absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Excellent. To Mark Posey.
Thank you, Chair. Minister, we last met at a cement factory in my constituency where we looked at the role of hydrogen in decarbonising heavy industry. We know that's happening, and we know that there's a role for hydrogen in heavy goods vehicles and construction equipment, because battery electric won't work because the batteries are so expensive. So we know we're moving to a wider hydrogen economy. We've just heard that people don't want heat pumps because we're well off track on getting heat pumps. People are very familiar with gas. We know that we can blend hydrogen into the gas network. It's currently 0.1%, can very easily go to 2%, and the system can go to 20% by 2027. Where are we with switching domestic consumers to hydrogen, bearing in mind that this committee visited Fife, where we saw a wind turbine and an electrolyser providing green hydrogen, and we know that much of the time we turn off wind turbines in the North Sea because there isn't the demand for them. So where are we in using that constrained wind to create hydrogen to put in our gas network to heat our homes?
Okay, complicated question. So you're right. It is absolutely possible. There are hydrogen homes that have been constructed. I visit them in Gateshead, and they are operating. And they are hydrogen boilers. They are hydrogen fires, hydrogen hobs, etc. And it works. I think you have to look at it in terms of the overall system balance. So you talked about hydrogen blending, which is a separate issue, which is whether you blend hydrogen into the existing gas network and whether appliances will still work on hydrogen, and the evidence is that up to about 20% they will. The question is, why would you want to? And if I phrase it another way, so you talked about hydrogen does not exist as a gas, that you have to make it. The greenest way of making it is through electrolyzers. So you take electricity, you put it through an electrolyzer, you produce hydrogen, and then you pipe it into homes, and then you potentially burn it in a boiler. The question I would put back to you, it's much more efficient to take that electricity in the first place and put it through a heat pump and then heat your home that way. You would need 6 times, in a simple calculation, you would need 6 times as much electricity to produce the hydrogen to put into a boiler to burn as you would to just power directly from a heat pump.
Isn't the electricity free if you use constrained wind?
Yes, but they're in different places. I mean, in the chairman's constituency, there's probably lots of available constrained electricity, but most of the demand is in the south of England. It's much cheaper to transport electricity from the north of Scotland down to southern England than it is to transport hydrogen. Which is not to say there isn't a massive use for hydrogen, and I'm extremely enthusiastic about it, and we are putting large amounts of money into supporting electrolytic hydrogen production, but we have to be careful about what are the most efficient uses of that. So as we visited in your own constituency, some of the more difficult to decarbonise industrial process, cement, ceramics, etc., absolutely a use for hydrogen. Long-term energy storage, which partly answers your question, is absolutely a use as well. We have large salt caverns that can be used for storing hydrogen in the longer term, and we can do exactly what you mentioned, which is use an electrolyzer when we have spare constrained power, produce hydrogen, store it, and then keep it for use when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing, which happens occasionally, I'm told, in the UK.
Right. Minister, we had a consultation, the government had a consultation on boiler standards, and that closed in March 23. It's now April 24. There has been no response. I mean, isn't it fair to boiler manufacturers to let them know what the future direction of government policy is?
So the response to the consultation on boiler standards will be out very shortly.
Okay. And I think you've covered the point on blending. Can we do... because isn't that an easy way
to answer
reduce
your question,
our emissions?
No, that's the short answer to your question. So your point about blending, again, and let me answer it in the same way. So it is possible to do. The rationale for blending is not so much to decarbonise the gas supply, because hydrogen is much less energy dense than natural gas, and of course you use energy to make it in the first place. The rationale for blending is very much to provide what I call an off-taker of last resort for those who are investing in new hydrogen production plants. Until we get a national distribution system in for hydrogen, which we also need to invest in, it makes sense.
In the main, Minister, can't we use the existing network? This is a network, of course, that the consumers and the people of this country have paid for over many years through their gas bills.
In terms of the high pressure distribution system, there are already plans to do exactly that. And in terms of the hydrogen strategy, we are putting together a business model at the moment to be out later this year for distribution systems and for the first couple of storage systems to be up and running, hopefully, or at least consented by the end of this year, as part of the general rollout of hydrogen infrastructure. And indeed, National Gas, I'm sure, will want to come along and tell you about their plans for repurposing parts of the existing gas network to distribute hydrogen.
Well, doesn't it make sense, if we've spent the money developing this infrastructure, to use it to the best effect?
In terms of the high pressure distribution system, absolutely. The question is whether we should constrain ourselves to using hydrogen for domestic heating just because we already have the pipes in the ground, when it makes, in my view, no sense from an overall decarbonisation point of view. Using electricity is much cleaner, it's much cheaper, and it's much more efficient in terms of an overall distribution system. Now, I absolutely accept you will get the gas networks who will come along here and tell you this is a great idea, because otherwise their pipes are worse than useless by the end of the decade. But we have to look at it in terms of the overall system benefits. My submission to you.
The way you're speaking, Minister, has a decision already been taken?
On what?
On the future of use of hydrogen in the gas network?
We've taken the decision in principle that we will support blending, but not because of its decarbonisation benefits, because actually they're not very great.
You reduce CO2 emissions by 20% if you put 20%?
But you don't reduce the CO2 emissions by 20% because hydrogen is much less energy dense than natural gas. So I think the figures are, even if you blend it up to 20%, you would only get, I think it's 6 to 7%, I need to check that figure, of actual decarbonisation benefits.
Is that not worth having?
potentially, but you would use an awful lot of energy to produce that hydrogen in the first place. And the question is, if you have limited supplies of hydrogen, is it not better used for, as I said, long-term energy storage or for decarbonising the difficult to decarbonise plants in your constituency that we mentioned?
You'd be aware of the exploration of white hydrogen in the world as well. It is a small thing, but I'm definitely sure you're aware.
I saw the reports of that. It would be indeed fascinating if that proves to be the case, because, of course, the big disadvantage of hydrogen is that you have to use energy to make it, and every time you convert it into a different form, you lose some of the benefits of it. But if it exists in natural form, we can extract it.
A global screening project.
I would say there are also some quite serious safety implications we need to look at. Hydrogen is much more explosive across a wide range of concentrations than natural gas.
Talking of explosive, I'll bring on my colleague Barry Gardner.
I really enjoyed your evidence to us there, Minister. And one thing I would ask you to consider, though, and that is that the government should clearly set out a hierarchy for the use of hydrogen, so that exactly in the areas that you talked about, cement, glass, ceramics,
that'll go in 6 minutes.
That should take priority. Then maybe
I'm sure my good friend
hierarchy of hydrogen use.
I'm sure my good friend Michael E. Brick, who has produced a hydrogen ladder which does exactly that, would be delighted that you were a satisfied reader.
I will tell him about 6 minutes. It'd be nice to finish this on the vote before.
I thought it was.
I agree totally. Yeah.
I thought it was in Alice in Wonderland that the ceiling got confused with the floor. But I find that the government has limited the powers of local authorities to set more ambitious energy efficiency standards for new build homes than the national minimum requirements. Now, if they're minimum requirements, then why not allow local authorities to raise them above the minimum? I just don't get it.
I don't know if officials can help me, and this is obviously building regulations, which sits within DLUC. The short answer to your question is that I have no idea. Any idea?
Captain,
very honest.
Your moment. This is what the minister has been ubiquitous in answering all the questions this afternoon.
I know it's my job to answer on behalf of the government as a whole. I'd be happy to speak to my DLUC colleagues and get an answer to your question. Mr. Gardner, I genuinely don't know. Do you know, David?
Yeah, so the Minister's correct, it's a matter for DLUC. DLUC are consulting on the Future Home Standard at present, and that's open till the 27th of March. So you may wish to respond to the consultation on this point.
I imagine that you will be having Alice in Wonderland conversations with your colleagues in government, Minister. All I would say.
Speaker Baroness Swinburne, who has temporary responsibility for Future Home Standards, because Baroness Penn is on maternity leave. I was talking to her yesterday about precisely that consultation. I will make your point to her.
Good. And does the government intend to formally support and fund local area energy planning as a means of tailoring the home heating transition to local needs?
So we are already working with a number of local authorities in terms of how they can put together local energy plans, where we have some experiments in terms of devolving funding directly to the West Midlands Regional Authority and to Greater Manchester Mayoral Authority, in terms of allowing further devolution of funding and allowing them to have more of a place-based model and producing the best particular model and plan for their own particular locality.
So there are pilots, but not yet a national programme.
There are some local areas at the moment. Actually, I've got a list in here at the moment.
I mean, it's also that heat network zoning is relevant to this point, because that will be for local authorities to designate based on the national zoning model, and those in deciding how you designate your zone and where you designate it means that you need to take a view on what alternative decarbonisation solutions might be available for the properties within.
There are a number of local energy advice demonstration projects. I'm just looking through here if I can see. Well, there is South East London Community Energy Basing. I can't see anything in your area of North London. Sorry.
Oh, fine. And just finally, have you evaluated the merits of creating and overseeing a single standards and accreditation body?
Standards in what area?
In terms
of efficiencies.
Well, in terms of coordination and planning for local authorities.
in the area of energy efficiency.
Yes, obviously.
Well, I mean, obviously, we do have the Trustmark standards to make sure that the installations are all of appropriate quality. Every government scheme is registered with Trustmark. Everything, all the measures are listed and are guaranteed, and the installers have to be up to the appropriate standard. I don't know if that's the
well, some of the evidence that we received told us that the current state of protections doesn't present a barrier, but others said that it did and made customers reluctant to invest. Stonewater said you wanted me to finish, Chair.
Yeah.
I can see that time is...
Yeah, thank you, Barry. Thank you, Mr. Gardner.
Going on. We can pursue that.
Thank you very much. Happy to chat separately.
Minister, can we thank you for your evidence? I actually got to say, and I think it was probably agreed, you're a minister that's very much on top of your brief, and that was very noticeable today with a rapid fire in the various areas that you gave us. So we thank you for that. Would urge you for some of the announcements, such as Eco4 and that timeline. You know the stuff we've raised it and what the pressure is. But I certainly found that a very useful session. I hope you did too. It'll certainly help a report. That's our final session in this area. Thank you very much. And there's a division due in the House of Commons any second now, which is 7 years old by the bell. So before the bell rings, order. Good afternoon. Thanks.
Thank you very much indeed.
The proceeding has ended. 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 The proceeding has ended.